Everything you need to know about the Polish woman who has long claimed to be the missing child, Madeleine McCann.
I want to know who I am, and I want to know if I am Madeleine McCann. I believe that I am Madeleine McCann.
For nearly 20 years, the parents of Madeleine McCann have suffered unimaginable torment. But for the last 3, they've had to endure an additional cruelty.
On October 6, 2025, the Leicester Crown Court opened a closely watched trial involving Julia Wandelt, a young woman from Poland, and Karen Sprague, a 61-year-old from Cardiff, who were accused of making unauthorized contact and causing significant distress to the McCann family. For years, Julia repeatedly claimed to be Madeleine McCann, using technology-altered images, sending numerous messages, and even approaching the family's doorstep, turning what began as a viral online story into intrusive actions in real life. This case illustrates how social media can amplify a mistaken belief, pushing an individual from a distorted sense of identity into behaviors that affect others offline. The courtroom in Leicester, hosting the first trial in the United Kingdom related to impersonating a well-known missing person, drew substantial attention from the public and international media, not only because the McCann family has been followed for many years, but also because the situation highlights the consequences that circulating claims can create once they move beyond the digital space. The trial was held to clarify the impact of misinformation, fixed identity beliefs, and the legal repercussions of prolonged pressure placed on a family that has already endured profound loss. Prosecutors opened with a firm statement from Michael Duck KC, declaring before the jury that Julia Wandelt was not Madeleine McCann, thereby establishing the central focus of the entire trial. As his words resonated through the courtroom, Julia Wandelt appeared unsettled and struggled to remain composed, while Karen Sprague stood beside her offering support in an attempt to steady her. The moment underscored the psychological pressure surrounding the case, rooted in the spread of information on social media and the long-lasting consequences of becoming fixed on an inaccurate identity. The trial was presided over by Judge Cutts, with a 12-member jury closely observing the prosecution's initial presentation regarding the alleged unauthorized contact and prolonged distress the 2 defendants were accused of inflicting upon the McCann family. The central allegations in the case focused on unauthorized contact and prolonged psychological pressure directed at the McCann family, which were said to have occurred from June 2022 to February 2025, during which Julia Wandelt repeatedly attempted to reach them through multiple methods, including phone calls, emails, and several attempts to appear in person at their home in Rothley. Prosecutors emphasized that these actions went far beyond personal fixation and became a pattern of behavior that significantly affected the daily life of the McCann family. Tension rose in the courtroom as major news outlets such as the BBC and The Guardian, along with local reporters, gathered to follow each development, reflecting the widespread public interest in a case that had already been associated with years of attention. The situation was viewed not only as a legal matter, but also as evidence of how social media can distort perception and escalate a private story into a viral phenomenon. The prosecution's opening arguments made clear their position that Julia Wandelt's repeated claims of being Madeleine McCann were not only unfounded, but also harmful to those involved, particularly the McCann family. In that context, the media and online environment were seen as contributing factors that amplified the situation, turning a personal claim into a topic of debate across community groups and social platforms. The trial was therefore expected to clarify both the defendant's conduct and the broader societal impact of misinformation once it spreads. What sets this case apart is the role of social media in driving Julia Wandolt's behavior, as the internet became a space that allowed her to publicly make unfounded claims and attract a large following. According to the prosecution, this is the first trial in the United Kingdom to examine the consequences of impersonating a missing person in such a widely circulated manner. The online environment enabled Wandolt to construct an alternate narrative about herself based on the resemblance she believed she shared with Madeleine McCann, while using that narrative to approach the McCann family in ways that exceeded appropriate boundaries. The trial therefore aims not only to evaluate Wandolt's pattern of conduct, but also to consider the impact of online visibility, digital communities, and the ways social media information can distort perception, intensify psychological strain, and affect those who have already endured real-life loss, after years of pressure from speculation and misinformation. The McCann family once again found themselves at the center of attention as their daughter's identity was repeatedly invoked in an unwanted context. The first day of the trial showed that the matter extends far beyond legal questions, becoming a starting point for broader discussion about identity, the influence of social media, and the boundary between reality and the digital world. As arguments continued, it became clear that the McCann family faced not only the emotional impact of unauthorized contact, but also the feeling that their daughter's name was being used to attract attention. By the end of the first day of proceedings, although parts of the situation had become clearer, many questions about identity, the influence of online spaces, and the limits of fixation remained unresolved, indicating that this trial will become a significant marker in understanding the complex connection between human behavior and the digital environment. In 2022, Julia Wandolt began appearing on online platforms with increasingly confident claims that she might be Madeleine McCann,
I believe that I am Madeleine McCann.
the central figure in a globally followed missing person case from 2007. What started as scattered posts quickly grew into a systematic effort to reinforce her own belief, including uploading comparison photos, using artificial intelligence editing tools, and generating enhanced simulated images. From placing pictures of herself side by side with Madeleine, to highlighting details such as eye shapes or the placement of birthmarks, Julia continually encouraged viewers to compare their features, causing the story to spread widely across social media. Public interest in the McCann case, combined with high engagement, further strengthened Julia's belief that she could be the missing person from years earlier. This online journey also raised broader questions about personal perception, the influence of digital environments on unverified claims, and the ways identity can be reshaped under the pressure of technology and public attention. This was only the beginning of Julia's subsequent actions, as she increasingly sought to construct and defend the narrative of the identity she believed to be true. Julia Wandolt's use of image editing tools, artificial intelligence, and digital filters elevated the appearance comparison process to a more complex level as she began altering her photos to create pronounced similarities to Madeleine McCann. These tools smoothed facial lines, enhanced facial structure, and even modified eye tones to mimic Madeleine's distinctive iris pattern, gradually blurring the line between authentic images and constructed ones. According to evidence presented by the prosecution, the images Julia posted no longer reflected her actual appearance, but had become digitally adjusted versions designed to support the identity narrative she was pursuing. Image analysis specialists noted that Julia used deep learning algorithms and simulation technology to alter eye color, soften facial details, and change other features, producing a visual profile that resembled Madeleine more than herself. This went beyond creating resemblance. It functioned as a form of visual argument intended to convince the public that she and Madeleine were the same person. The edited images spread rapidly, increasing Julia's follower count, including individuals who believed her claims and even pressured the McCann family to undergo biological testing. As the digital identity she constructed continued attracting attention, Julia became increasingly convinced of her own claims and treated the AI-processed images as evidence for her personal belief, despite the fact that they did not reflect reality. However, developments in the case showed that Julia Wandolt's claims did not arise only once. As the investigation expanded, prosecutors found that before identifying herself as Madeleine McCann, Julia had contacted 3 different missing person organizations and, in turn, claimed she might be 3 other missing girls in separate cases, including Inga Gericke in Germany and Asia Bishop in the United States. This repeated shift in claimed identity raised numerous questions about perception and motivation, especially since it was only in the case of Madeleine McCann that Julia's assertions gained significant traction on social media and received a large amount of engagement. These findings were viewed as signs of instability in self-concept, in which an individual attempts to attach themselves to alternate identities as a means of escaping reality or seeking the attention they feel everyday life does not provide. In Julia's case, the online persona tied to Madeleine gradually became the identity she maintained, while the digital environment, filled with constant feedback, played a key role in reinforcing and expanding the reach of her claim. Julia Wandolt's story did not circulate only on social media platforms, but also appeared on the Dr. Phil talk show, where controversial cases are often brought before the public. Her participation in the program was supported by Fia Johansson, a figure who frequently appears in content related to missing person cases and who presents herself as a spiritual advisor. Johansson helped expand the reach of these claims by publicly endorsing the idea that Julia might be connected to the Madeleine McCann case, while also using her own social media and media channels to amplify the narrative. In this context, Julia's personal issues were elevated into public content, becoming a form of sensational material designed to attract television audiences. The combination of psychological elements and the show's entertainment-driven format placed Julia's claims into a sphere of widespread debate, rather than one focused on specialized assessment or support. This environment also allowed the story to continue spreading, as the public followed her shifting and increasingly reinforced assertions without fully recognizing the psychological strain or real-world consequences involved. Although the program touched on aspects of Julia's personal perception, placing it within an entertainment framework turned the situation into consumable content rather than a case requiring careful handling. Julia Wandolt's case illustrates how issues related to perception and confusion about one's own identity can be amplified under the influence of social media and online culture, as she repeatedly shifted from claiming to be one missing person to another, revealing instability in self-identification and a desire for recognition that differed from reality. Attention from online communities created a continuous feedback loop in which each interaction strengthened Julia's belief in her own claims and encouraged behaviors that exceeded appropriate boundaries, such as contacting missing person organizations and approaching the McCann family. Social media played a significant role by allowing Julia to form a group of followers who supported her statements despite their lack of verification, turning a personal narrative into widely circulated public content. The involvement of figures like Fia Johansson and the attention from television programs further contributed to transforming Julia's assertions into an online phenomenon rather than an issue requiring appropriate care-based evaluation. In this context, the case reflects not only one individual's fixation on a self-constructed identity, but also how the digital environment can blur the line between reality and a curated online persona. As the matter reached the courtroom, Julia's story became a clear illustration of the intersection between personal perception, the viral power of the internet, and the psychological consequences that emerge when someone pursues attention through extreme means. In the summer of 2022, Julia Wandelt began a series of continuous contacts with the McCann family, starting with online posts and quickly escalating into a prolonged and troubling pattern of outreach. Believing she had a direct connection to the 2007 case, Julia repeatedly sent emails, made phone calls, and left voicemails for Jerry McCann, Kate McCann, and their daughter Amelie, despite receiving no response from the family. These developments formed a clear example of how distorted perception, fueled by online environments, can lead to significant consequences when someone becomes fixated on a digital identity. The sequence began with an email sent to Jerry McCann, in which Julia wrote that she might be his daughter, laying the groundwork for the persistent contact that followed. This message reflected more than a passing thought. It showed that Julia was actively constructing and reinforcing the narrative she had begun circulating online. From that point on, her actions mirrored the belief that she might be the person involved in the missing person case. Julia then sent messages to Amelie McCann, identifying herself as the one behind the viral claim intended to prompt public comparison, illustrating how heavily online attention had shaped her perception. Her reference to the story's online reach showed that she viewed social media engagement as a form of validation, pushing her to pursue the narrative with greater intensity. The messages addressed to Kate McCann were particularly notable, as Julia attempted to exert influence by writing suggestive and easily misinterpreted content about family relationships in an effort to provoke a response from Kate. This tactic reflected her attempt to insert herself into the McCann family's emotional sphere, trying to break through their natural caution using unverified information. When the McCann family did not respond to her efforts, Julia's fixation on the narrative continued to intensify. Reflecting a strong reliance on online validation, this series of events marked the period in which her need for acknowledgement began to dominate her behavior, leading to the erosion of ethical and personal boundaries. Julia Wandelt's efforts reached their peak when she left a 1-minute 52-second voicemail for Kate McCann, a recording later presented in court as one of the most notable pieces of evidence. The voice in the recording sounded tense and included emotionally charged phrases, with Julia saying, "Don't give up on your daughter," and hinting at information she claimed only a few people would know, aiming to persuade Kate of the authenticity of the claim she had been pursuing. The content of the voicemail showed that this was not merely a plea for attention, but an attempt to create emotional influence on the McCann family. In addition to this voicemail, Julia made approximately 60 other calls to Kate McCann, each unanswered. These repeated calls became a pattern of persistent contact, adding pressure to a family already affected by significant distress and further demonstrating Julia's fixation on the narrative she had constructed. During the investigation, authorities determined that the lack of response led Julia to misinterpret the situation, viewing the silence as a form of confirmation rather than recognizing it as a clear boundary set by the family. This increasing fixation drove her to continue repeating the same actions, reflecting how perception can become distorted when shaped by a firmly held belief and reinforced by the online environment. By June 2024, Operation Grange, the police unit responsible for investigating the Madeleine McCann case, formally intervened and warned Julia Wandelt that she needed to stop contacting the McCann family, as they were legally protected from unauthorized approaches. However, Julia responded by saying, "I will not give up," a statement that reflected the depth of her fixation on the narrative she was pursuing.
All I'm going to say is what I said back in 2022. You are not Madeleine McCann, okay? If you do go to Leicester again, there's offences called harassment here. If you cause any harassment, you could be arrested, okay?
I will never give up. This is something that I want to tell you.
I know you won't.
Investigation documents showed that Julia had entered a cycle of distorted perception, in which every rejection only strengthened her conviction, instead of being understood as a boundary that needed to be respected. As the McCann family remained silent, Julia interpreted their silence as a form of confirmation and escalated her attempts to reach them. The online environment, where she received encouragement and validation from some followers, became a driving factor that further distorted her perception. In this context, Julia's behavior was viewed as the result of an imbalance in her perception, intensified by the viral nature of social media, creating a continuous loop between her attempts at contact and the repeated rejections. When the case reached the courtroom, it was seen as an example of how an individual can become deeply entangled in an identity they construct within the digital space, while also highlighting the risks of online environments where public attention and validation can drive behaviors beyond reasonable limits, affecting both the individual involved and those around them. In November 2024, Julia Wandelt's prolonged attempts to contact the McCann family escalated to a more troubling stage when she and co-defendant Karen Sprague traveled to the United Kingdom and went to Rothley, where the McCann family lives. Their physical presence marked a shift from online behavior to real-world intrusion, creating consequences identified as serious during the investigation. Security camera footage outside the McCann home captured a car with its lights turned off parked in front of the property, indicating that this was not a random appearance but a deliberate act of approaching the family. In a message sent to a third party, Karen Sprague confirmed their location and showed an intention to wait for the family to return. According to court documents, this was viewed as a form of unauthorized monitoring that caused concern for those involved. When Kate McCann returned home that evening, she noticed the parked car, and shortly afterward, Julia approached the entrance, requesting that biological testing be conducted to verify her claim. Standing at the doorway prevented Kate from entering immediately and created a tense situation. Julia asserted her belief that the encounter was necessary, while Kate attempted to retreat inside. Meanwhile, Julia and Karen continued urging Kate to respond and knocked forcefully on the door as she moved away, making the situation increasingly uncomfortable and tense. When Jerry McCann arrived, the matter was still unresolved. Julia and Karen attempted to hand Jerry a letter, insisting that its contents were important and needed to be considered. Jerry made it clear that he did not want this contact and asked them to leave the area. But the two women did not comply immediately. The events at the scene showed a clear escalation from online communication to direct confrontation, while also illustrating the impact on the McCann family as they once again faced an intrusion into their private space after years of distress and public pressure. The following day, another development underscored the seriousness of the situation when a bottle of wine and a letter were left outside the McCann family's front door. The letter was signed Madeleine and contained expressions of emotional fixation maintained by Julia Wandelt, in which she referred to a sense of connection and urged the family to undergo biological testing. The use of a signature resembling Madeleine McCann's name was seen as emotionally intrusive and indicative of Julia's effort to construct a relationship that had no basis in reality. For the McCann family, this was an additional act of intrusion, not only into their privacy, but also into the memory of their daughter, as the letter attempted to impose a connection they did not recognize. In court, an audio recording of Kate McCann was presented, in which she described the tension she felt on the evening of the incident. The content of the recording reflected the psychological pressure the family faced from the repeated contact and emphasized the severity of the behavior they had to endure. The court noted that Julia's actions stemmed not only from distorted perception, but also from a deliberate pattern of contact that directly affected the McCann family's daily life. According to assessments by authorities, the impact of these actions extended far beyond temporary discomfort, causing long-term effects on the sense of safety and stability the family had worked to rebuild after years of loss and public scrutiny. Social media continued to play a central role in amplifying Julia Wandolt's claims, creating an online following that regularly supported and reinforced the narratives she promoted. This environment gave Julia the level of attention she sought, while simultaneously placing her in direct conflict with the McCann family, who simply wished to maintain privacy and peace after years of intense public scrutiny. Public interest in Julia's viral story led her to believe that reality could be shaped through the online world and the attention of digital audiences, prompting her to push her narrative forward regardless of its impact on those involved. For the McCann family, being pulled back into the spotlight following Madeleine's disappearance imposed significant pressure, especially as Julia's actions introduced a new form of intrusion that went beyond anything they had previously experienced. According to arguments presented in court, these behaviors were not attempts to uncover truth or resolve an unanswered question, but rather efforts to impose attention and insert herself into the life of a family that had already endured profound distress. Julia's belief about her own identity became a disruptive element in the McCann family's efforts to maintain stability, while also highlighting the risks that arise when personal fixation combines with online notoriety and emotionally misdirected interactions. The direct encounter at the McCann family's doorstep was viewed as the culmination of a prolonged pattern of behavior fueled by a desire for recognition and validation, illustrating the extent to which online environments can influence the actions and perceptions of those involved. In the case involving Julia Wandolt and Karen Sprague, the latter played a significant role in escalating the pattern of inappropriate contact directed at the McCann family. Karen Sprague, a 61-year-old from Cardiff, was not merely an observer, but an active supporter of the claims Julia pursued, while also engaging in various speculations surrounding the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. According to documents presented in court, Sprague believed unfounded theories suggesting that the McCann family had something to hide, and frequently discussed these views with Julia, leading the two to reinforce each other's distorted interpretations. This phenomenon was described as a form of shared cognitive fixation, in which two individuals with similar misguided beliefs find mutual validation through online environments. Karen's support for Julia did not stop at emotional encouragement, but extended to concrete actions, including accompanying Julia to Rothley and participating in attempts to contact the McCann family. Their continuous exchanges and mutual reinforcement contributed to the escalation of the situation, becoming a sustained pattern of pressure on the McCann family and a key factor considered during the investigation, as well as in the courtroom. A clear example of the shared cognitive fixation between Julia Wandolt and Karen Sprague was demonstrated through a series of text messages presented in court. In this exchange, Karen wrote, "We should get their biological sample." And Julia responded, "Yeah, we could look in their trash." The content of the conversation showed that the two not only shared the same misguided belief, but also viewed accessing the McCann family's personal information through improper means as a viable option. The casual tone in their messages reflected the process by which both women reinforced each other's beliefs, allowing what began as speculation to evolve into actions they considered necessary to sustain their narrative. Karen Sprague's role extended beyond private exchanges. According to investigative records, she also emailed Operation Grange, the unit overseeing the Madeleine McCann case, expressing her personal views and suggesting that the McCann family had matters that needed further examination. This action showed that Karen had moved from supporting Julia privately to attempting to introduce her own assumptions into public discussion, while also seeking to influence investigators with unfounded speculation. Based on the evidence collected, the court viewed Karen's involvement as a driving force that strengthened and encouraged Julia's behavior, as the two continuously exchanged messages and validated each other within a shared, distorted belief system. This dynamic ultimately led both women to engage in actions that exceeded reasonable boundaries, creating a notable example of shared cognitive fixation occurring across both online environments and real-life interactions. The shared cognitive fixation between Julia Wandelt and Karen Sprague was analyzed as a process of mutual psychological reinforcement, in which each maintained her own distorted belief while simultaneously receiving validation from the other. Before meeting, Julia pursued the conviction that she had a direct connection to the Madeleine McCann case, while Karen firmly believed unfounded theories suggesting that the McCann family had something to hide. When they connected online, the two quickly formed a feedback loop in which unverified opinions were reinforced back and forth and gradually became central to the way they interpreted the situation. The internet played a key role by providing the space for them to find each other, share their beliefs, and expand their initial ideas. This shared fixation appeared not only in private exchanges, but also clearly in their actions. According to case records, Karen not only encouraged Julia online, but also directly participated in attempts to make contact, including driving Julia to Rothley, where the McCann family lives. From there, the two stood outside the family's home in an effort to confront them directly and push forward Julia's claims. This trip demonstrated that Julia's belief about her identity and Karen's trust in unverified theories had moved beyond the online world and turned into real-life actions. Their arrival in Rothley and their intrusion into the McCann family's private space were considered by the court as acts of invasion and the result of a chain of distorted perceptions maintained and reinforced through the digital environment. The culmination of the prolonged series of actions involving Julia Wandelt and Karen Sprague occurred on February 19, 2025, when both were arrested near Bristol Airport. According to investigation records, Julia was taken into custody immediately after exiting the plane, while Karen was arrested in the parking area, where she was waiting in a vehicle. The arrest of the two women marked the final step in a pattern of contact deemed inappropriate toward the McCann family, and demonstrated the seriousness of the shared cognitive fixation that had developed between them. Throughout the preceding period, Karen played a significant role by continuously supporting Julia both emotionally and logistically, participating in multiple attempts to make contact and reinforcing unverified beliefs. The court noted that the convictions they shared and strengthened through online environments led to a series of actions that violated the McCann family's personal boundaries and contributed to the escalation of both women's behavior. The public nature of the arrest illustrated how distorted perceptions formed in digital spaces can translate into real-world actions, affecting those involved and producing long-lasting consequences. The case of Julia and Karen was viewed as a clear example of how mutual reinforcement within a shared belief system can bind two individuals more tightly to a misguided narrative, ultimately leading to decisions and behaviors that extend beyond the online sphere. The court emphasized that these interactions pushed them toward actions that exceeded acceptable limits, becoming a central factor in how the case was assessed. The trial of Julia Wandelt and Karen Sprague took place on October 6th and 7th, 2025, at the Leicester Crown Court, drawing widespread attention as the full investigative materials were presented to the public. Multiple media outlets, including the BBC, closely followed the proceedings as the prosecution opened its presentation with a detailed timeline describing Julia's behavior over a period of more than 2.5 years. The court was asked to consider not only Julia's pattern of contact with the McCann family, but also the psychological implications and social context surrounding the case in the digital era. One key piece of evidence introduced was the voicemail Julia left for Kate McCann in April 2024, in which she made emotionally suggestive statements intended to prompt a response. Prosecutors argued that this was not an isolated message, but an example of how Julia attempted to exert influence by exploiting the circumstances of the McCann family. After the recording was played, the court continued to examine letters and text messages Julia sent during the same period. A letter signed Madeleine was highlighted for its emotionally driven content, in which Julia described a sense of connection and urged the family to consider her claims. According to the prosecution's materials, the content of these communications was crafted to create emotional pressure, reflecting the extent of Julia's distorted perception and her persistent desire to sustain her personal narrative. These pieces of evidence were presented as part of a long-term behavioral pattern and served as the foundation for the court's assessment of the nature and impact of the actions within the broader context of the case. In addition to the emotionally charged messages and confrontations, the prosecution also presented digital evidence showing that Julia had deliberately manipulated images in an effort to substantiate her claims. Before the jury, they detailed how Julia used artificial intelligence tools and deepfake technology to alter her own photos, making her face resemble Madeleine McCann more closely, including adjusting iris patterns and facial features to create a pronounced similarity. According to the prosecution, this was not merely a personal visual experiment, but a deliberate process designed to construct a visual reality that supported the narrative Julia was pursuing, enabling others to be convinced by what they saw. The court also heard about Julia's exchanges with a charity organization in Poland that assists missing person cases, where she had previously claimed she might be several other victims, before shifting to the assertion that she was Madeleine. This line of evidence was used to reinforce the argument that Julia's behavior did not stem from any real connection to the McCann case but reflected a prolonged fixation on becoming someone else, someone known, someone whose name and story had already drawn widespread attention. As the trial proceeded, multiple witnesses were called to clarify the impact that Julia Wandelt's persistent contact had on the McCann family. A psychologist testified in detail about the prolonged stress the family experienced, including disrupted sleep, heightened anxiety, and a constant sense of vigilance against further contact. According to the witness, Julia's repeated actions prevented the McCanns from distancing themselves from the stream of unwanted messages and encounters, aggravating the emotional pain they had carried for years. The next portion of the trial focused on the ethical issue surrounding personal belief and the limits of behavior stemming from that belief. Prosecutors argued that holding a personal conviction is not a violation in itself. However, when such beliefs are imposed on others through pressure or prolonged contact, they leave the realm of personal thought and become a form of emotional intrusion. The court was asked to determine whether Julia's conviction that she was connected to the Madeleine McCann case could justify her pattern of contact. Arguments showed that although Julia may have been influenced by perceptual issues, her persistence and refusal to respect the boundaries set by the McCann family reflected a deliberate and sustained pattern of behavior. Preliminary findings indicated that the impact of these actions had tangible effects on the McCanns and could not be considered a mere consequence of a personal belief. The case therefore served as an example of how psychological factors, combined with the online environment, can lead to real-life behavior that affects others. The trial of Julia Wandelt and Karen Sprague was seen as a reminder of how digital spaces can reinforce distorted perceptions and create conditions that push real-world actions beyond reasonable boundaries, while raising broader questions about society's response to individuals whose beliefs are shaped by online influences. The McCann family continued to be affected by these events, not only because of their earlier loss, but also because they had to endure years of ongoing, unwanted contact. Julia Wandelt's case, in which she claimed to have a connection to the Madeleine McCann investigation, raised numerous issues related to the formation of identity, psychological difficulties, and the influence of online environments on personal perception. According to materials presented in court, this was considered a representative example of how an individual can gradually detach from their sense of self and construct an alternative identity to fill cognitive gaps. To understand Julia's pattern of behavior, it is necessary to consider both her mental health background and the role of the internet as a channel that reinforced her distorted beliefs. Information disclosed during the proceedings showed that Julia had received psychological support multiple times, indicating the presence of long-standing mental challenges. Although specific details were not fully made public, records noted that she had experienced several past difficulties that contributed to her sense of detachment from herself and from reality. Experts testifying in court assessed that Julia's perception may have been influenced by disorders that make it difficult for a person to maintain a stable sense of identity, leading to the creation of an idealized self-image disconnected from real-life circumstances. One concept mentioned in the analysis was the state of identity void, in which a person is unable to link past experiences with the present and gradually develops a sense of cognitive emptiness. In Julia's case, seeking a different identity was regarded as a mechanism to fill this void, and the image associated with the Madeleine McCann case provided the level of attention and visibility she felt she lacked. Madeleine McCann, the central figure in a widely known incident, became the model through which Julia attached the narrative she was constructing, not because of any real connection, but because it was an identity capable of attracting public attention in the online environment. According to expert evaluations, Julia's pursuit of this identity reflected an effort to escape her sense of disconnection from herself and to seek a new, influential image that served as an anchor for maintaining her presence online. Within the broader context of the case, the court considered these underlying psychological factors as part of the explanation for her behavior, while emphasizing that pursuing a personal belief could not justify the prolonged pattern of contact that affected the McCann family in real life. The role of social media in Julia Wandelt's case was viewed as a central factor, as online platforms became the space where she could present her newly constructed identity and receive feedback from digital audiences. According to the analysis presented in court, every comment noting a supposed resemblance between Julia and Madeleine McCann contributed to reinforcing the belief she was pursuing, creating a feedback loop that increasingly bound her to this alternative identity. The online environment, with its rapid spread and wide audience reach, became the foundation where unverified claims were encouraged and amplified. The rising level of engagement through likes, comments, and shares functioned as a form of validation in Julia's eyes, causing her to grow more confident in the identity she was constructing. This feedback cycle was described by experts as a defining feature of modern internet culture, where distorted beliefs can be reinforced and sustained through instant interaction. In Julia's case, positive responses from online communities allowed her to maintain and expand a narrative with no basis in reality, illustrating how digital environments can influence personal perception and contribute to the creation of an identity that does not reflect the truth. Julia's story is not unique. Throughout history, there have been cases of mistaken identity in which someone declared themselves to be a person they had no real connection to, ranging from missing children to historical figures believed to have disappeared. And the case of Anna Anderson, who spent decades claiming to be Princess Anastasia Romanov, is a prominent example of how an individual can create and live within an identity that does not exist. Like Anna, Julia constructed an alternate self, an identity not rooted in reality, but in the need to fill a deep psychological void. The psychological mechanisms behind such cases are always complex and often stem from loss, loneliness, or traumatic experiences that leave a person unable to recognize themselves. In Julia's situation, the role of Karen Sprague cannot be overlooked. Karen did not merely support Julia passively, but became a crucial source of reinforcement for the illusion Julia created. This was a form of shared foundational fixation, in which two individuals with similar beliefs or illusions continuously nurtured and validated one another, making their distorted convictions increasingly stronger. Karen acted as a substitute maternal figure, someone who gave Julia the sense that what she was pursuing was justified and worthy of continuation. From believing conspiracy theories surrounding Madeleine's disappearance to physically driving Julia to Rothley to confront the McCann family, Karen was not simply standing behind her, but was the driving force that pushed the illusion from the online world into reality. This psychological attachment made Julia feel she was not alone, that her story was real, that she was being shared, validated, and reinforced. Julia Wandelt's story therefore became a clear example of how mental health issues can intensify in the digital age. Identity voids, unhealed emotional wounds, and the amplifying power of social media allowed a fabricated identity to become the world she lived in. And as online reactions became the fuel for her illusion, Julia grew increasingly convinced that she was Madeleine McCann. This stands as an important warning about how identity can be constructed and magnified in the era of social media, where validation and attention sometimes overshadow truth. Ultimately, Julia's illusion exposed the fragility of the human psyche and the devastating consequences that arise when online echo chambers make distorted beliefs stronger than reality. In the Julia Wandelt case, in which a young woman claimed to be the missing child Madeleine McCann, the legal, media, and ethical aspects intertwined into a complex maze of responsibility, truth, and the impact of public platforms. What began as an online declaration quickly turned into an uncontrollable phenomenon. where mental health, the amplification of social media, and the energy of online communities collectively fueled the construction of Julia's fabricated identity. 3 layers of firewalls: the media firewall, the legal firewall, and the ethical firewall, became the clearest framework for understanding how this story erupted and ultimately escalated into a serious case. The media firewall refers to the way different media outlets filter and present a story to the public, and in the Julia Wandelt case, the contrast between traditional media and online media became so stark that it practically created 2 separate worlds in the United Kingdom, where the trial took place. Traditional media approached the story with clear restraint, avoiding live broadcasts, keeping cameras out of the courtroom, and making an effort not to turn the proceedings at the Leicester Crown Court into entertainment content, thereby keeping the legal process at the center and protecting the privacy of the McCann family, who had already endured the spotlight for nearly 2 decades. But on the other side of this media firewall was the internet, particularly YouTube, TikTok, and other social platforms, where Julia Wandelt's story was quickly appropriated, remixed, and amplified in any direction without editorial control or ethical responsibility. Driven only by algorithms and the race for views, within that environment, Julia was elevated by some YouTubers and content creators as a kind of heroic figure, despite the absence of scientific or legal evidence supporting her claims. And every video, live stream, or facial comparison became a piece of a sensationalized narrative designed to capture attention. While British media attempted to maintain seriousness, online media turned the entire case into content, a digital circus in which Julia was not only heard, but encouraged and legitimized simply through the viral spread of her story. This clash between responsible journalism and unregulated online media showed how the media firewall created 2 versions of the same event, and caught between those extremes. The McCann family once again found themselves pulled into a whirlwind of sensational exposure they never sought, making the media firewall a clear example of the divide between ethical responsibility and the demand for consumable content in the digital age, where truth can easily become the first casualty of a viral story. The legal firewall is the boundary established by law to distinguish personal belief from harmful conduct. And in the Julia Wandelt case, this boundary became a crucial factor as the legal system was forced to confront a situation in which a person's firmly held belief extended far beyond the limits of private life and transformed into a pattern of behavior that infringed upon the rights of others. Julia's conviction that she was Madeleine McCann may be understood as an expression of psychological difficulty, but the law does not judge people by what they believe. It judges them by the consequences of their actions. And what Julia carried out: dozens of emails, phone calls, voicemails, monitoring behavior, direct approaches, and even the use of AI-generated imagery to make herself resemble the missing child, crossed entirely over the line between self-expression and intrusive harassment. The legal system recognizes that the McCann family has the right to be protected from harassment. And when Julia ignored the warning issued by Operation Grange, the law was required to intervene to prevent this intrusion from escalating into a real threat. Importantly, the court did not judge Julia's belief, but judged the impact of the actions built from that belief. Because regardless of whether the origin lies in mental health struggles or personal delusion, the law maintains the principle that freedom of belief can never justify violating the privacy, safety, and peace of another person. The decision to conduct a DNA test, something Julia had demanded for months, became a pivotal legal turning point because once the results proved she was not Madeleine McCann, the entire constructed identity she had built collapsed completely, underscoring the function of the law in restoring reality to its proper place when an individual can no longer distinguish the boundary between illusion and the real world. From this point, the legal firewall demonstrated its essential role, protecting innocent people, setting limits on harmful beliefs, and affirming that any action, even if driven by instability or delusion, remains subject to legal constraints when it infringes upon the fundamental rights of others. The ethical firewall raises a fundamental question about the responsibility of online platforms and digital communities in nurturing, amplifying, and normalizing collective illusions. And in the Julia Wandelt case, this question became more urgent than ever, as the internet provided her with a space where a fabricated identity could be built, circulated, and validated by hundreds of thousands of people without any form of verification. Social media operates on likes, shares, and engagement, and that very structure created a feedback loop in which Julia's false claims were not only noticed, but celebrated, unintentionally turning a personal illusion into a communal phenomenon. When users left comments such as, "You look exactly like Madeleine," or "Maybe you really are that girl," they contributed to sustaining a fictional self, making Julia believe her conviction was reasonable and recognized, pushing her deeper into the illusion. This raises the core ethical question. When illusions are fueled by the online environment, who bears responsibility for real-world harm? The individual who creates the illusion, or the platforms and communities that make it possible? In Julia's situation, the internet was no longer a tool for searching for truth, but a mechanism that amplified distortion, turning obsessive behavior into entertainment content and false claims into public debate, blurring the line between reality and imagination to a dangerous degree. Users who supported Julia, whether knowingly or unintentionally, helped create an environment in which illusion was treated as truth. And when that illusion led to harassment, intimidation, and intrusion toward the McCann family, responsibility rested not only with Julia, but also with the systems that allowed the false narrative to grow. The ethical firewall shows that online platforms cannot remain passive when misleading content causes real-world harm. Because when a space is designed to amplify every voice, it also amplifies distortion and risk. The tragedy of Julia lies in the fact that while she believed she was pursuing truth, she was actually trapped inside a feedback structure built by the very illusion the internet had magnified. And as her real identity no longer aligned with the digital persona she created, she lost the ability to recognize the consequences her actions inflicted on others, especially the McCann family, who were harmed by seeing their daughter's story turned into a tool to satisfy a stranger's need for attention. The question, if a person builds a firewall to protect a lie, who lights the fire, underscores the ethical core of the case. Because responsibility belongs not only to the individual who created the illusion, but also to the platforms and audiences that fueled it through indifference, curiosity, and lack of verification. Ultimately, the ethical firewall in the Julia Wandelt case shows that when society allows false narratives to be amplified without control, real-world consequences become inevitable, and ethical responsibility must be shared among the individual, the platforms, and the community that helped turn illusion into genuine harm.